before we start actually building our character, it's a good idea to know what that character is going to look like. Now, this is going to depend on your position as a modeler. Perhaps you're building concepts. In that case, it's your job to come up with the concepts for those, what will eventually be those final production characters. But in many cases, you're going to be modeling, and you're going to be modeling something that has been concepted by someone else. So you're going to get delivered to you some sort of artwork. It could be concept art, it could be just a couple of views, it could be very extensive model sheets with a lot of different expressions and turnarounds. It really depends on the job. But the idea is that you want to be able to look at that artwork and reproduce what you see in 3D. So let's take a look at some of the different kinds of concept art that we can have. Here's some simple concept sketches for some characters. You can see we only have one view of each of these characters. They've got expressions. They're not in default poses. They're in, posed up, showing their character off. They've got expressions on their faces. Now, these are all things to think about. So we can start to come in here and look at these and break them down into different pieces. So we see the main body shape, and you can see we have the accessories we want to build. And in our mind, we start to break this down and figure out how we can build this. Okay, so you may get concept art delivered to you like this. Maybe you have one drawing of a character and you need to reproduce that. Okay, here's the same thing. You've got a character with different kinds of hair, different kinds of clothing, and you need to be able to reproduce that from the artwork. And these are just kind of black and white sketches. Same thing here. You've got him in a actual pose. He's not in a default pose as you would maybe build him in 3D, and he does have an expression, but it kind of shows off his character and his posture. Things like that. You can get a good idea of the different kinds of pieces that you're going to want to build. Okay, these are for us to look at, not necessarily for us to use in the software as reference, but for us to see and reproduce as we go through the process. Same thing here. We've got her posed up, show her personality, her hair. So you're going to be delivered these different kinds of artwork. Maybe you've got something that's a little bit more complete. So you've got something here that's colored up. It's again in a regular. It's posed up. It's not in a default pose, but you've got a lot more detail, which in our mind we can sort of say, oh, I'm not really worried too much about the color. I'm really more concerned about the shapes, the form, how all these pieces are working together, and kind of separate that out as we look at it. Okay, here's a bunch of different kinds of ideas that you can create when you're concepting. So whether you're doing the concepting yourself or someone else is concepting, the idea is to come up with a lot of different examples, and here you can see a lot of those different examples playing on a specific theme, and you could take any one of these and start to build a character, a 3D character around these, okay, based on what you see. Now, those are sort of just concept art, pieces of concept art, concept sketches, and we would look at those off to the side and build our 3D model by looking at those. Something like this, you could call a model sheet or maybe character sheet or turnaround, and what that's going to do is take one of the concepts that you've decided on, let's say, and it's going to create different views of this from different angles. Okay, and ideally they're going to be orthographic views, so you're going to have that perspective taken out. But you can see that we have a view of the back, so we know what the back is supposed to look like. We have a view from the side. We know what the side is supposed to look like, and you can see they've actually removed the arm. Okay, otherwise the arm would be sticking down and it would be obscuring the view of the side profile of the body. So by taking that off, we're able to see, where that actually, what the side of the body is actually supposed to look like. Okay, and ideally these are all supposed to match up. So you've got the eyes all lined up. Everything matches up from side to side going across. Okay, here you can see the front view, which gives us a lot of information. You can see the placement of the eyes and where the facial features should be placed, the height of the hair, the beard. You can see all the details for the body. And it's sort of in a default pose. So the different poses you might see, you think of a T pose where the arms would be sticking straight out. This is more of an M pose where it's a little bit more relaxed. These poses are modeled in a default position really to make things easier for rigging and animation. You want it to take all the kind of expression out of the face, take the poses out of the body. That's all going to be added in when your animator and rigger goes in, sets up controls, and so you want to make that easy for them to do. Okay, so that's why we put it in the T pose or the M pose. Just kind of put it at a default state, and then let the rigging and animation add that personality to it. Okay, we want to give them as much flexibility as possible. Okay, so whether you're creating the artwork yourself or you're getting it from someone else, it's always good to have a plan going forward for when you're actually going to be building. Even when you're doing concept art, maybe you're going in ZBrush and you're concepting things out. Sometimes it's good to just sketch things out on paper as well. It's a little bit cheaper than doing it on the computer, depending on what you're doing. So plan is always a good idea. So we want to take our artwork, look at the reference, and for something like this, we can actually use this in our application to guide our modeling. So apart from just taking a piece of artwork off to the side and sort of visually looking at it, we can actually bring some artwork into Maya. This does a couple things for us. For you and I, it's going to allow us to match up the work that we do together. So I know that the work that I'm doing in the lesson is going to be very similar to the work that you're doing because we're working from the same reference image. Okay, it's going to free us up to talk about tools and techniques and not as much about trying to eyeball the proportions and things like that. So it's really going to be helpful for us to create something that looks very similar. So let's see how we can actually set this up. So what we want to do is here in Maya, hit the space bar, and we want to set up these reference images in our front and side views. And these are going to be referred to them as image planes or reference images. So what we want to do is go ahead and set those up. So let's go into the front view, and we'll go to View, Image Plane, and let's go to Import Image. It's going to default to our Source Images folder. So in your project files, you'll find these. And so we were in the front view, so let's choose the front plane. And this is just an image of the front, an orthographic view of the front of the character that we're going to be using for this particular project. So let's go ahead and open it up. It's going to come into our viewport, and it's also going to show up in our perspective view. Okay. So let's go ahead and just import these as is, and then we'll change some of the settings to get them all to match up. So let's go ahead in the side view, import image, and let's bring in the side plane. Okay, so now you can see both of these. They're kind of at the center in our perspective view. That's fine if we leave them there, but we don't really want them to be on the center. So let's go ahead and change some of the settings here. So first of all, we want to make this a bit bigger, okay? And we also want to bring it up so he's standing on the axis here. So let's go ahead and we can start to bring up these image planes. We can change the height and width. So I want him to be about 170. I want him to be about 170 centimeters. And so I'm going to go ahead and, because there's some space on the top and bottom, I'm going to set this up to maybe 190 or so. So you can see that makes it quite a bit bigger. All right. And I also, in the X, so image center X, I want to take this and take that away from here so we have room in the center to work. Okay, so I'll take it maybe minus 95 or so. And then on the Y center, that'll actually allow me to bring this up above the surface. So let me go ahead, set that to about 88.5 or so. Okay, so it's off the center, and it's offset there, and it's also enlarged a bit. All right. Let's also take this Z center. I'm just going to move it just a little bit so he's more, maybe more in the center, just a little. So maybe something like that. Now let's take the front view, and we'll do the same thing. I want to scale it up the same amount. If we don't remember, we can go ahead and select that other one. That's a 190. Let's increase that just a little bit. Let's take this one, do the same thing. All right, and we want to go ahead and make sure that we move it up the same amount. So we want it to still match up with our artwork. So take it up 88.5. And again, we want to move this, and we want to move it back. Okay, so let's go ahead and take the Z center, and we want to move it back. And let's move it back so it kind of matches up there. So around minus 90 or so. Placement doesn't have to be super exact. Okay, and you can see here, We'll take this camera and I'm just going to move it back a bit. So now his feet are going to be standing on the axis, okay? And if you want to, you could measure that, but it's going to come out to, should come out to around 170 centimeters or so. You can go ahead and do that if you want to, just so we've got our scale right and consistent. You know, you can always scale things up and down in Maya, but if you're building objects that are going to work together, it's a good idea to build them so that they'll be similar scale or appropriate scales. So we can come in here and measure that out. Let's see. So it's a little bit short, but I think that's just fine. So I'll just get it in the ballpark. Okay, so the idea now is that we have these image planes that now when we go into Maya, we're able to now build our geometry and we can match it up with the shape from the front and also from the side. So we get two different views of this that we're able to match up. So if we create the nose, we know that the point in 3D space is going to be here, and it should be in pretty much the right spot. Now one thing that we can do with these in addition is to make it a little bit easier to see our geometry. So we can take that color gain for that and we can dial it down. We can change our color offset, dial it up, and we could just make this a little bit more faded so that our geometry will show through a little bit more. So let's do the same thing with this one. I'm just opening the attribute editor, taking that color gain down and taking the color offset up a little bit will allow us to get that sort of faded look. We just want to be able to see it so that we can match up our geometry. Okay, now when you're building characters, you may have these turnarounds. You may not have the turnarounds. Maybe you have the turnarounds, but you're not bringing them in. A lot of times there are going to be little bits of it that aren't going to quite match up, and you're not going to find that out really until you start to build it in 3D, because you're trying to build it in two different views, and maybe it's not matching up. So you may have to do some troubleshooting when those things come up, kind of split the difference as far as the position of certain things. Really the idea is to get as close as you can to the artwork that your production is using so that your model can be used as rendered and rigged and animated and then textured up and used in the production. So we've got our scale set, we've got our image planes brought in, we talked a little bit about concept art. So let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson.